Hi there. In this video, I want to show you a little bit more about my latest extension for SketchUp. This one's called Random Tools, and you can see right here how it shows up on the extension warehouse. And what's behind this extension is basically that I had a bunch of little scripts that I either had in my book, Architectural Design with SketchUp, or in on my website, sketchupfordesign.com. And I figured at some point I should really put this together and bundle it and make a little extension out of it. So that's what this is. It has a bunch of tools to modify geometry, place geometry, and so on and so forth. So you can see here on this photo already what's behind some of those tools. The terrain here has been randomly modified by moving vertices. Then objects have been placed with a variety of parameters, and we'll cover some of those in a minute. Then over here you can see, of course, how things get placed. You can randomize textures, which is really useful. And then you can create some cool images like this fairly easily. So let's take a quick look in SketchUp proper, how this works, and I'm going to go over all the tools very quickly. Okay, so first of all, you can get the extension from the usual places, extension warehouse, of course, right from SketchUp works really well. Right here is the link. You can download it and then it'll show up like this. You can, of course, also get it from my website or from the Sketchucation plugin store. It's also on there. When it comes in, you will have access to all the tools through the toolbar, as you can see right here, or under Tools, and then down here, Random Tools right there. All right, once we have that, we can get going. So let's go from left to right and just kind of look through all of the tools, and then of course you can see what you can what you can do with those. Now, the first tool basically just does a random face push pull, and it's fairly simple. You highlight faces first. You can actually always highlight things that don't get used by the tool, like the edges right here, they just get ignored. But I'm just highlighting the faces inside here, and then I click on the tool, and then I can give it some parameters, a minimum extrusion, a maximum extrusion. So these are length parameters in this case. Depending on your unit system, you can type anything in here basically. So I'm saying minimum extrusion is 2 inches, maximum is 1 foot, and then you have the option to create new faces, yes or no. I'm just going to click yes right now and okay, and there you go. Every single face randomly extruded. Let me show you the difference with the create new faces. If I say no, then it looks like that. Basically everything stays attached. Then here's another version of that with a lot more faces. You usually get a nice little feedback down here. You can see, of course, when the tool's working, and there's your random extrusion for all of those. All right, so that's the first tool. Random face push pull. You can do negative numbers too if you want to, if that makes sense for you. The second option here is random vertex positions, and for that I use the sandbox tools to simply create a plane. So up here with the from scratch tool, I just created this. Now for all of these, you always have to be in the proper context. So I couldn't do anything right now with the tool, see here, because outside this entity, this grouped entity. So I have to go inside that entity. Then I can highlight all of the edges is what I need at this point, and it doesn't again matter if I also highlight the faces, they just simply get ignored. So then I go to random vertex position, and I can basically give some parameters, whatever I want. And again, this is in distance units, so whatever your distance units are, you can just type it in, including the meter or feet or whatever you have basically. And so, for example, in my case, if I only want to do a vertical, let's say by 2 feet, might be a little much, but then I would basically just change the blue number, and then when I say OK, again, Now we have many more faces and vertices, so it'll take a little while, but when this thing is done, you know, this is what you get. Basically a random um, perturbation. And again, you see here from the top, it looks regular because I only chose the Z value to be changed. Where is this useful? Well, you could, for example, introduce some randomness on surfaces like pool water or maybe even landscape items. So that's that. Okay, so that's the first two. The next two tools allow you to place components randomly, either on faces or on edges. And again, a good example is this landscape that I've created now. Now everything is a little bit more molded. Obviously, you may be starting with a real landscape and a real tin, but I'm actually going to just explode this just for the sake of being in the proper context. You'll also need a component instance at this point, and I do have a 2D face me component here, and then I do have a little grass patch that's 3D but is made up of images. And with any of these components, keep in mind that they will get placed at their origin. So wherever this origin is, that's where they will get placed. And so over here, I'm at the base of the tree, and here I'm in the center of that. So I should be good with those, basically. I don't think I'll do it for the full surface now, but just to kind of show you roughly what happens, I'm going to pick a bunch of those, and I'm going to pick the tree. And so then you can start the tool as long as you have faces and one component selected. And then you have a few options. So the first one is maximum number of copies per face. Maximum number because it has a bit of a a workaround to place things on faces, and if they're not very well oriented in the XYZ direction, then some of these points miss the face and get ignored. So it may not be that 2 copies are placed on every single face. So that of course makes no sense for me in this case. So I'm gonna switch this to 1, and even that's a little much. Then you can also give it a maximum rotation variation, which basically means if I had my 45 degrees here, then the objects would get rotated randomly by maximum 45 degrees, so between 0 and 45. This is a face me component, so it doesn't really matter what I do right here. Scale variation is an interesting one because now I can either have everything fairly similarly scaled. So the lower the number it is, the closer all the scales are. So if it's 0, then they're all the same size. But if you switch this to 1 and then higher, there will be much larger and much smaller items there. So be careful with what you pick there, of course, but you can always, undo and restart and so on. Orientation is interesting because you can orient the copies either normal to the face, i.e. 90 degrees to the face, or up. So for example, if this is a landscape, then the trees will very likely be pointing upward rather than normal. So for something like trees, I would do up, and I'll show you in a second with the grass component. That makes much more sense being normal, of course. Then you can place these on their own layer, or tag as it's called now, of course. And you can pick and choose whatever you want to do here, but if you want to create a new tag or a layer, you have to create it before you start the tool. It basically queries whatever tags and layers you have over here and presents them to you, and then you can pick one. All of the copies will also get grouped, so that makes hiding things a little easier and working with things. But this way you can also have them on their own layer or tag, and then basically allow you to turn them on or off. Okay, so this looks about good, and then I'm going to click OK. I'm going to go through that, and we got ourselves a little forest here. And you can see now, if I get a little closer, these trees are randomly placed on the faces. There's should be always just one per face. It misses some faces, and that makes sense too. Now you got to keep in mind here for this that there are triangles. Sorry, actually the folding line is this way. So every single one of these, what looks like rectangles, are actually two triangles, and so it would be one tree per triangular face. So you got to be a little careful. You know, you can really very quickly create a ton of geometry, but that is, of course, you know, what you most probably want when you do landscaping. Okay, so another option is you can do grass, and I'm got my little grass component over here. I'm gonna place this there, and I'm gonna do the same. And now, of course, I'm gonna crank up the number. Let's say 40, and we could rotate it to this one. Actually, is oriented like that. Scale variation is good. Orientation. In this case, I'm going to do normal so that it's on the face. 40 might be a little high. Let's do 20 for now. And say OK. Now you see, of course, since I'm placing more, everything is a little slower. And again, be wary of the many geometries that you can create. But now you have grass, and of course, you know, depending on how you render this, you may want more or you want less or whatever. So that's that. And then the other, or the second version of that, is right next to it, and it basically places these components not on faces but rather on edges. So I'm going to just grab a little spot there. Oops, that does not work, of course. Grab a little spot there. Grab my little grass there. I'm going to say on edges. Let's say 10, normal, and it looks, well, that's a little high. Looks good. And then when it does that, of course, we're going to see things appear just on edges. So now, you know, you can use that in combination with the faces or separately, or whatever you need, basically. So that's these two tools, placing components on faces and on edges. Next, we've got our classic conundrum where things just look too perfect. If you've copied, I don't know, a bunch of trees into your model and you want to make them look a little more varied, then of course you can highlight them. Go to randomly or randomize object scale, rotation and position. So those are the three parameters that you can vary for every single one of these. So rotation, I could do the full circle. Position basically means that it perturbates in the ground plane direction by this distance, so whatever that is. So in my case, it's 6 inches in both directions. I'm going to actually switch that to 0 for now because I don't want that. And then the scale variation, I'm going to leave it 1 again, so I'm going to get a nice variation there. And then when you click on OK, it'll go through them and you get your variation. This doesn't just work on the ground, you know, wherever these are placed in whatever orientation, it'll work just properly. Just keep in mind again that all of this is based on this internal coordinate system. Okay. So there's that. So that's a useful feature. And then finally, if you have a lot of components that are just way too similarly oriented and, you know, too much in a row, then you can just randomly swap things. This only works with components. The last tool actually works on groups as well, right here. But the randomly swap objects works on components because it basically swaps out the definitions of these components. And then when I click that button, ta-da! Now you can wait until it produces a legible QR code. But that's what's behind this tool. All right, so then finally, the last tool, you know, the idea behind that is, of course, if you have an object that is textured, that has fairly discernible texture, like wood, for example, with the knots and everything, you make copies of it. There's nothing worse than when they all look exactly the same. So with this last tool here, you can randomize the texture position, and it basically randomly just pushes the texture in the in both directions. So you can just simply highlight things, and in this case actually you can highlight faces, what you got here on the right, that are not grouped, and you can highlight groups. This is a group right here, you can see a solid group right there. And then when you do that, highlight them all, go to the tool, ta-da, everything's nicely randomized, and you can just keep clicking until you're happy with the result. That looks reasonably realistic, and then you're done with this. Now, one thing to keep in mind is this does not work on components, because in order to randomize these 5 boards, the tool actually has to make them all unique, which would kind of remove the benefit of working with components. So then even when these are groups in SketchUp now, in the latest few versions, these are set up internally with a definition that once you copy a group, the copy also has the same definition as the first. So what I needed to do here in order to make this tool work for groups is to then force all of these to be unique, because otherwise it wouldn't end up just like this. So you just got to be aware of that, but usually that is what you have your model set up anyways, and so then you can keep going with this. Anyways, so that's a little overview of all of the random tools that are available in this new extension, and I hope they're useful for you. And if you make something cool, show me. If you have any questions, post them on my website. And other than that, I hope you have fun with this. Enjoy.